남자들이 가만 안 둬 흔들리는 그녀의 맘
Yeah, sure. Alright, so thank you so much for joining me back here today with another Sunday school lesson. I hope you've been well and that you've been praying a lot and reading the Bible a lot and that God has been working in your life. And I pray for Him to be in your life more often. So, alright, so with just what we talked about last week, we talked about how, the favoritism game still runs within, it was Jacob and he switched his name to Israel. So he still played favorites game. And this time, he favored Joseph, his youngest son, more than he did his other sons, in which that favoritism made Joseph's brothers jealous of him, and that jealousy turned into anger, and that anger caused them to sin. And the sin in this case was hindering God's will. You know how God found favor within Joseph, and he was going to have Joseph rule over his brothers, but then Joseph was not with them anymore, so God's plan could not have come to fruition if he wasn't with his brothers. And so, in a sense, God forgave them for that because he still had plans for Joseph. And so we're about to get into Joseph today. And so this message is called God Redeems Adversity. And so if you guys would, read Genesis chapter 39, verses 1 through 6. And that same chapter, verses 19 through 23. And Genesis chapter 41, verse 14 through 16. And so please read those Bible verses and we'll be right back. Alrighty, so thank you so much for reading those Bible verses. And so we'll get right into it. In Genesis chapter 39, verses 1 through 6 and 19 through 23, it talks about how Joseph, after he's been sold into slavery, he comes into contact with someone who bought him from those people that came to that he was sold to. Yeah, so he was sold to the chief officer of, maybe military, or I'm not sure, it just said officer. And so with that said, you could say he found favor within the officer's eyes, and God had blessed Joseph as well in order for that position. And so he became in charge of the officer's house. But the thing is, and so you could say that Joseph was living a very good life so far, right after being sold into slavery. But it all came crashing down like always. With in this case, in verse 6, it says that Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And so that caught the attention of Potiphar's wife. And so with that said, Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph twice, but then that failed twice. On the second turn, however, she managed to get, you could say, rip his clothes. And so she had evidence to wrongly accuse him of actually, trying to take advantage of her. And so when Potiphar found out, he got angry with Joseph and threw him in prison. And so, back to slavery now again. And so Genesis chapter 41, verses 14 through 16, it talks about how Pharaoh found out about Joseph and wanted him to interpret a dream that no one else can interpret. But before we got to this place, you remember how Joseph went to prison, but he stayed there for 2 years. Why 2 years? Well, because speaking about Pharaoh again, he had 2 servants. All right, and one of those 2 servants, they both had dreams, and so Joseph interpreted those dreams for those two guys. And so one of them, he was going to be killed off, while the other one was going back to serving Pharaoh. And so the one request that he asked that guy that went back to serve Pharaoh was, remember Joseph when he goes back to work for Pharaoh. But no, he forgot him for 2 years. All right, and so that was a very long time stuck in jail. And so finally, when Pharaoh had that dream, he was like, who else can interpret dreams? And so that servant that was with Joseph in jail, he finally remembered Joseph after these 2 years. And so he finally said, oh, okay, I know there's one guy that can interpret dreams. And so that's where Genesis chapter 41, verse 14 through 16 came into play. And so, after reading that one, it wasn't about what Joseph did, because Pharaoh asked Joseph, he was like, so you can interpret dreams. But Joseph said, not me, but God can. And so, just from reading this one, it's like, Joseph's been through he's been through a pretty tough life. And so just with that verse, it said, he's, you could say, in a sense, Joseph was still praising God after everything that happened. And so why? After being sold to slavery, after being wrongly accused of something he didn't do and being thrown into prison for it, and being forgotten 2 years in prison, why was Joseph still able to praise God? Well, the thing about it is, Joseph can interpret dreams. That's just it. He can interpret dreams. Remember the previous lesson, Joseph interpreted his own dream. Remember the dream about how his pile of wheat, or his brother's pile of wheat, was bound down to his pile of wheat. He interpreted that dream. He knew what that dream was going to entail. And so he just didn't know when it was going to occur. But he knew it was going to occur somehow. And so all the trials that he was going through, it was like he had faith. He knew it was going to happen from God already. And so that's what you could say kept his hope up and his faith strong, even though he was going through a tough rut. And so the moral of this story, it applies to us as well, is that no matter what we are going through, like how much things we've been through in the past or adversity that comes our way, we have this hope that God will allow that to happen to us so that we may further trust him and that his plan for us will come to fruition. And so that was my lesson for today. It was very short, but very powerful as well. So I hope this encourages you to continue your faith with God and hopefully grow stronger. And I pray for a good day for you guys and a good week for you guys. So until next time, be safe and God bless.
너무 예뻐서 남자들이 가만 안 둬 흔들려